Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's July 1st. Seriously, already. Oh my God. More than halfway through the year. That's incredible. Hope everybody's having a beautiful day. It's beautiful here, sunny, back to being hot. We had a nice Monday. The temp dropped. It dropped to like 88 degrees was the high. We were at 82 all day long. It was pretty incredible. But always grateful to have the heat. So today is Constitution Study Group. It's Wednesday. I've committed myself to this. I appreciate if you're watching this, sticking around. Today's going to be good. Today's a little bit more of a history lesson, and I will go into a little bit of an introduction of some of the the beef of what we're talking about. But I'll be introducing the origin of the Constitution, where all of the ideas and the overarching themes came from for the Constitution, which is the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers. So I'll give a little bit of history on those, and then I'm gonna read two different Federalist Papers, two of the 85 Federalist Papers. I will read, and we'll look over. One of them is said to be the most important Federalist paper. That's Federalist Paper number 10. So I'll just give a look at that one. And then Federalist Paper 29, I've come to learn is a good, is the paper that basically the militia was based on. And I know I spent a lot of time last week talking pretty naively about militia and its, and the Second Amendment in the Constitution, our right to bear arms, as well as our police force. I talked about that last week and realized that there's a lot of context that needs to be provided to have a solid conversation around the Second Amendment and what is a militia and what are our current forms of militia. I think that's very interesting. So we'll get into that. Let me get some tea going. Drink some tea. So yes, the Constitution the Constitution is actually not the very first document that was created after America's independence, after the Revolutionary War. The first document was actually the Articles of Confederation. And there were a lot of holes I wouldn't say holes, it's just like when you're first building something and first navigating something and figuring something out, you have to leave a lot of room for evolution and learning things. So I think that was a big part of it. But from what you can read, in the history books, the major problems was dealing with America's position in the global politics and its strength and protecting itself and interacting well within the global community. The big argument was about, should we centralize our power as a government to do this, or should we decentralize? And so those two factions is what's made up of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And those were all published from, was that 1787? Before the Constitutional Convention, where the Constitution was actually drafted, and it was almost like a vote between these two fractions. Which way are we going to go? Although there are certain elements of the Constitution that do pull from the Anti-Federalist Papers, which I've come to learn that actually the Bill of Rights was something that was argued against in the Federalist Papers. So I'll share that for another show. Maybe that'll be the next one. I'll look at that Bill of Rights Federalist paper, which I believe was Federalist paper number 84. Hamilton, our buddy Hamilton, he wrote in Federalist 84 against the importance of rights for the citizen, but contrary to what was written there, he actually ended up being the one to draft the Bill of Rights, even though he originally disagreed with it. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I mean, I'm sure there's so much to try to like read and learn the context of this going on. So 1788, 1788, 1789, like this is a long time ago, over 200 years ago. Navigating all this new stuff for us. So the Federalist Papers are written by just three people, and they're arguing for a stronger centralized federal government, while the Anti-Federalist Papers were written by a vast community of people. And because the Anti-Federalists lost, as usually happens with history, the Anti-Federalist Papers themselves were actually lost. Due to their decentralized state, they weren't compiled and recorded the same way that the Federalist Papers were. The Federalist Papers were written by three people and were predominantly published like in the same place, and then they were formally published as its own, document, as its own book, essentially, which is what we can read now. It's 85 different papers. It's huge. My friend Tavia, when, she's been seeing me do all of these Constitution study groups, and, she really let me know how naive I was last week in talking about the Second Amendment. But what am I to do? I'm just trying to figure this out, and I don't mind being vulnerable and letting you guys see this as I'm navigating all of it. Oh, that's nice. I think that's the firewood green. I have all of my teas from the Taste the People tea class series that I was doing. All the leftover teas from every one of my classes are here. So I just keep randomly picking a different cup. Oh, sorry, Rita. I keep picking up just like a random cup of different teas. So today I'm having firewood green from Heritage. Lovely tea. If you like smoked teas. This is not smoked, it's not heavily smoked. It's subtly, lightly smoked. It's really, really pleasant. So, it's really interesting, kind of like researching, or I hardly should say it's researching. I'm just like pulling up some things, and a lot of the stuff that I'm reading, I'm like reading it fresh right here. So I'm like researching with you guys. I'm learning with you guys. I'm not a teacher. I am only a student, just sharing my experience with everybody. But in looking at that kind of conflict between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, it's almost very similar to what we're dealing with now. And not necessarily Democrat versus Republican, because it could be said that the Democrats and the Republicans are, the political parties, the organizations that, really are controlling who's in office and what's going on and what kind of laws are being created at the time. Those are pretty Federalist oriented, philosophies. It would be more of like I shouldn't say anarchists. That's not the right term. But, I think that there's a growing community of people right now that are extremely interested in maybe not a third party, but interested in kind of scrapping the whole bipartisan thing and really kind of distributing the power and everything between the states and between the local governments, and kind of doubting the community interest and real authentic interest and community of the centralized federal government, being doubtful. And I think that there's a lot of people, especially the younger generation now, and maybe that's just a thing. Maybe that's just a generational thing, because it seems like whenever I was younger, there was also that same, like whenever I was like Gen Z age, when I was in college and very young, I also had a very similar kind of perception of federal government. I still do, actually. So I'm actually going to put the time into reading the Anti-Federalist Papers And it's interesting, the Anti-Federalist Papers, for the most part, were pretty much like lost until like the 1960s. I think there was somebody that, there was like a historian that started compiling things together. And there are 63 anti-federal, oh no, how many? How many are there? Oh, there's only 16? No, there's gotta be more. Maybe. I don't know. It's because the Anti-Federalist Papers were written by so many different people and published across so many different platforms. There's not the same kind of like numbering system that the hi Terry, good to see you. There's not the same kind of numbering system that we have with the Federalist Papers. Federalist Papers are very easy to follow. Although there is a pretty cool little chart I'm looking at right now that has the different subjects. So here are the main subjects of, and there's like Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers that correspond to each subject. So the need for a stronger union, and the union is more referring to like federal union, like the union of the different states. Bill of Rights, nature and powers of the union, responsibility and checks and self-government, extent of union, states' rights, bills of rights, taxation, extended republics, taxation, broad construction taxing powers, defense, standing armies, the judiciary, government resting on the people, executive power, regulating elections, House of Representatives, the Senate, and the representation in House of Representatives and Senate. So, yeah, and that was something else I didn't say earlier, that one of the issues that the early American government was having was on taxation, and was on, the ability of the Senate or the Congress to do, to pass laws. So that's why you see tax is a big part of several of these different subjects. So that's what they were trying to figure out in this new document that they were creating. So what I want to read today is Federalist Paper number 10, which in all the articles I've written, or not written, I haven't written any articles that I've read today, has identified a Federalist Paper number 10 to be like the most foundational of what ended up becoming the Constitution. Okay, so Terry recommends about Hamilton, and Hamilton is, one of the main writers of the Federalist Papers, and so that, backbone of the Constitution. She recommends reading a book, which, thank you for that, Terry, I'll check it out. 2 books, actually. The first one is My Dear Hamilton, which is a novel, and then Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton. That could be interesting. And with the Hamilton movie coming out, that's kind of cool too. Kind of popularizing and bringing this topic to the mainstream, I think, is really important. Very cool. Eliza Hamilton. I am not familiar with Hamilton, but I look forward to reading that. I think it's good. Okay, so that was his wife. That's cool. I love her pictures. I love her photos. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to get to it. So I'll start with number 10, and then after number 10, oh, this one looks long actually, so maybe I'll do that next time. Because I did want to talk about the militia stuff today, because I know I did a pretty half-baked job last week in talking about it, and my friend had told me that was a priority, to understand what militia was and the context. And I think if we do that, then we can, better, I think that this is actually a good place to have a conversation around gun laws or not even just laws. Like, I think that we could be very effective in solving a lot of the problems around violence just by having like cultural understanding between one another. Sometimes laws are necessary to do that. Eliza was amazing. Yeah, I look forward to reading her story. I read a little bit just now when I searched her name. She started an orphanage, so I'm sure she did a lot of, community work, and having a husband like her, I'm sure she was totally into that. What an exciting time, to be to be in that and in that kind of relationship of influence during a time of not only revolution, but history of like humanity, not even just like history, like general history. Like, we could say everything that we're doing is history and could potentially, be written in a history book, but to like be the first ever to forge a new way, forge a new culture. And, we're in those times now, which is exciting. And that's why I'm doing this practice now, because I really feel like we are, on the tipping point of some really major stuff happening, and even, borders changing and governments changing and new ideologies taking over, and kind of the power that the decentralized voice has acquired over the past decade due to the internet and modern technology, information sharing abilities. Pretty incredible. During the time of the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, I'm sure the Anti-Federalists were, at a great disadvantage of winning that argument, because Anti-Federalists requires distribution, so that the power is among everybody versus the power being among, the centralized, just a few. And at a time where communication technologies were extremely limited, how do you aggregate that influence without the internet, without, and so that's why I think it's really important that we power up what we're doing, because we have the tools now to bring that power together. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and jump into number 29. If I have time afterwards, then I'll go back to 10. So it's titled "Concerning the Militia" from the Daily Advertiser. So that was one of the newspapers that these papers were written. It was written on Thursday, January 10th, 1788, by Alexander Hamilton. To the people of the state of New York. The power of regulating the militia and of commanding its services in times of insurrection and invasion are natural incidents to the duties of superintending the common defense and of watching over the internal peace of the Confederacy. It requires no skill in the science of war to discern that uniformity in the organization and discipline of the militia would be attended with the most beneficial effects whenever they were called into service for the public defense. It would enable them to discharge the duties of the camp and of the field with mutual intelligence and concert and advantage of peculiar moments in the operations of an army, and it would fit them much sooner to acquire the degree of proficiency in military functions which would be essential to their usefulness. This desirable uniformity can only be accomplished by confiding the regulation of the militia to the direction of the national authority. It is therefore with the most evident propriety that the plan of the convention proposes to empower the Union to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Of the different grounds which have been taken in opposition to the plan of the convention, there is none that was so little to have been expected, or is so tenable in itself as the one from which this particular provision has been attacked. If a well-regulated militia be the most natural defense of a free country, it ought certainly to be under the regulation and at the disposal of that body which is constituted the guardian of the national security. If standing armies are dangerous to liberty, an efficacious power over the militia and the body to whose care the protection of the state is committed different kind of force. If it cannot avail itself of the former, it will be obliged to recur to the latter. To render an army unnecessary will be a more certain method of preventing its existence than 1,000 prohibitions upon paper. In order to cast an odium upon the power of calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, it has been remarked that there is nowhere any provision in the proposed Constitution for calling out the posse comitatus to assist the magistrate in the execution of his duty, whence it has been inferred that military force was intended to be his only auxiliary. There is a striking incoherence in the objections which have appeared, and sometimes even from the same quarter, not much calculated to inspire a very favorable opinion of the sincerity or fair dealing of their authors. The same persons who tell us in one breath that the powers of the federal government will be despotic and unlimited inform us in the next that it has not authority sufficient enough to call out the posse comitatus. I'm going to see what that is. I don't even know what that is. Posse comitatus. It looks like Latin. It was signed in 1778 by President Hayes, the purpose which was continue to limit the powers of the federal government and the use of federal military personnel to enforce domestic policies. Okay, so that makes sense. So it's separating the military from the militia. And that's the difference. Okay, so back to this. The latter, fortunately, is as much short of the truth as the former exceeds it. It would be as absurd to doubt that a right to pass all laws necessary and proper to execute its declared powers would include that of requiring the assistance of the citizens to the officers who may be entrusted with the execution of those laws, as it would be a belief that a right to enact laws necessary and proper for the imposition and collection of taxes would involve that of varying the rules of descent and the alienation of landed property, or of abolishing the trial by jury in cases related to it. It being therefore evident that the supposition of a want of power to require the aid of the posse comitatus is entirely destitute of color, it will follow that the conclusion which has been drawn from it and its application to the authority of the federal government over the militia is uncandid as it is illogical. What reason could there be to infer that force was intended to be the sole instrument of authority, merely because there is a power to make use of it when necessary? What shall we think of the motives which could induce men of sense to reason in this manner? How shall we prevent a conflict between charity and judgment? By a curious refinement upon the spirit of republican jealousy, we are even taught to apprehend danger from the militia itself in the hands of the federal government. It is observed that several corps may be formed, composed of the young and ardent, who may be rendered subservient to the views of arbitrary power. What plan for the regulation of the militia may be pursued by the national government? Is it possible to be foreseen? But so far from viewing the matter in the same light with those who object to select corps as dangerous, were the Constitution ratified, and were I to deliver my sentiments to a member of the federal legislature from the state on the subject of a militia establishment, I should hold to him in substance the following discourse. The project of disciplining all the militia of the United States is as futile as it would be injurious, if it were capable of being carried into execution. A tolerable expertness in military movements is a business that requires time and practice. It is not a day or even a week that will suffice for the attainment of it. To oblige the great body of the yeomanry and of the other classes of the citizens to be under arms of the purpose of going through military exercises and evolutions, as often as might be necessary to acquire the degree of perfection which would entitle them to be the character of a well-regulated militia, would be the real grievance to the people and a serious public inconvenience and loss. It would form an annual deduction from the productive labor of the country to an amount which, calculating upon the present numbers of the people, would not fall short of the whole expense of the civil establishments of the states. To attempt a thing which would abridge the mass of labor and industry to so considerable an extent would be unwise, and the experiment, if made, would not succeed, because it would not long be endured. Little more can reasonably be aimed at with respect to the people at large than to have them properly armed and equipped, and in order to see that this not be neglected, it will be necessary to assemble them once to twice in the course of a year. There was a word in there I want to look up. I'm guessing from the context, it's like a group of men who are held in captivated small landed estates. Okay, it's a volunteer cavalry force raised from the yeomanry in Britain. So it's British. So it's like voluntary cavalry. So that makes sense. But though the scheme of disciplining the whole nation must be abandoned as mischievous or impractical, yet it is a matter of the utmost importance that a well-digested plan should, as soon as possible, be adopted for the proper establishment of the militia. The attention of the government ought particularly to be directed to the formation of a select corps of moderate extent, upon such principles as will really fit them for service in case of need. By thus circumscribing the plan, it will be possible to have an excellent body of well-trained militia ready to take the field whenever the defense of the state shall require it. This will not only lessen the call for military establishments, but if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formable to the liberties of the people, while there is a large body of citizens, little, if at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army, and the best possible security against it if it should exist. Thus, differently from the adversaries of the proposed Constitution, should I reason on the same subject, deducing arguments of safety from the very sources which they represent as fraught with danger and perdition. But how the national legislature may reason on the point is a thing which neither they nor I can foresee. There is something so far-fetched and so extravagant in the idea of danger to liberty from the militia, that one at a loss whether to treat it with gravity or with raillery, whether to consider it a mere trial of skill like the paradoxes of rhetoricians, as a disingenuous artifice to instill prejudice at any price, or as the serious offspring of political fanaticism. Where in the names of common sense are our fears to end if we may not trust our sons, our brothers, our neighbors, our fellow citizens? What shadow of danger can there be from men who are daily mingling with the rest of their countrymen and who participate with them in their same feelings, sentiments, habits, and interests? What reasonable cause of apprehension can be inferred from the power in the Union to prescribe regulations for the militia and to command its services when necessary, while the particular states are not to have the sole and exclusive appointment of the officers? If it were possible seriously to indulge a jealousy of the militia upon any conceivable establishment under the federal government, the circumstance of the officers being in the appointment of the states ought at once to extinguish it. There could be no doubt that this circumstance will always secure to them a preponderating influence over the militia. In reading many of the publications against the Constitution, a man is apt to imagine that he is perusing some ill-written tale or romance, which instead of natural and agreeable images, exhibits to the mind nothing but frightful and distorted shapes. Gorgons, hydras, and chimeras dire, discoloring and disfiguring whatever it represents and transforming everything it touches to a monster. Oh, that's interesting. A sample of this can be observed in the exaggerated and improbable suggestions which have taken place respecting the power of calling for the services of the militia. That of New Hampshire is to be marched to Georgia, of Georgia to New Hampshire, of New York to Kentucky, and of Kentucky to Lake Champlain. Nay, the debts due to the French and Dutch are to be paid in militiamen instead of louis d'or. That's French. I'm sorry, I can't read French. Ducat. Let me see what this is. Louis d'or, Ducat, and Ducat. Are you guys keeping up? Yeah, it's like French money. Okay. I still don't get it in that context, but anyway. Yeah, be paid militia and instead of that. Okay. At one moment, there is to be a large army to lay prostrate the liberties of the people. At another moment, the militia of Virginia are to be dragged from their homes 500 or 600 miles to tame the Republican contumacy of Massachusetts. And that of Massachusetts is to be... No French here. Yeah, me neither. Is to be transported in equal distance to subdue the refractory haughtiness of the aristocratic Virginians. Do the persons who rave at this rate imagine that their art or their eloquence can impose any conceits or absurdities upon the people of America for infallible truths? If there should be an army to make use of an engine of despotism, what need of the militia? If there should be no army, whither would the militia, irritated by being called upon to undertake a distant and hopeless expedition for the purpose of riveting the chains of slavery upon a part of their countrymen, direct their course but to the seat of the tyrants who have meditated so foolishly as well as so wicked a project to crush them in their imagined entrenchments of power, and to make them an example of the just vengeance of the abused and incensed people? Is this the way in which usurpers strive to dominion over a numerous and enlightened nation? Do they begin by exciting the destination of the very instruments of their intended usurpations? Words I never get to use. Do they usually commence their career by wanton and disgustful acts of power, calculated to answer no end, but to draw upon ungovernable ambition? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped a line. I'm going to read that sentence again. Do they usually commence their career by wanton and disgustful acts of power, calculated to answer no end, but to draw upon themselves universal hatred and execration? Are suppositions of this sort the sober admonitions of discerning patriots to a discerning people? Or are they the inflammatory ravings of incendiaries or distempered enthusiasts? If we were even to suppose the national rulers actuated by the most ungovernable ambition, it is impossible to believe that they would employ such preposterous means to accomplish their designs. In times of insurrection or invasion, it would be natural and proper that the militia of a neighboring state should be marching into another to resist a common enemy, or to guard the republic against the violence of faction or sedition. This was frequently the case in respect to the first object in the course of the late war, and this mutual succor is indeed a principal end to our political association. If the power of affording it to be placed upon the direction of the Union, will there be no danger of a supine and listless inattention to the dangers of a neighbor, till it near approach has superadded the incitements of self-preservation to the too feeble impulses of duty and sympathy. Publius. Publius, that's how he signed it off. Oh, here we go. Oh, so he ended all of his papers with that Publius. The definition is, well, is used by both patrician and plebeian families and was very common at all periods of Roman history. It gave rise Yeah, I still don't get it. Maybe I'll get it in time. He was anonymous, so that was his sign-off of anonymity. That's interesting. I'm trying to read somewhere here so I can get it accurate. Oh, you're right. So that was like the anonymous like author pseudonym between those three guys. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. That's so cool. So now, that was it. That was the whole 29th one talking about militia. So obviously there was like an argument, and I want to see if it's short enough. I'll look at it. So let's see. Brutus, number 10, is the Anti-Federalists. Thank you, Terry, for helping me with that. I know, I'm so, like, unknowledgeable on this, but you gotta learn sometime, right? Oh, this one's pretty long. I'll have to read it another time. To the people of the state of New York, the liberties of a people are in danger from a large standing army, not only because the rulers may employ them for the purposes of supporting themselves in a usurpations of power, which they may see proper to exercise, but there is great hazard that an army will subvert the forms of government under whose authority they are raised and establish one according to the pleasure of the leader. We are informed in the faithful pages of history of such events frequently happening. 2 instances that have been mentioned in a former paper. They are so remarkable that they are worthy of the most careful attention of every lover of freedom. They are taken from the history of the 2 most powerful nations that have ever existed in the world, and who are the most renowned for the freedom they enjoy and the excellency in their constitutions. I mean Rome and Britain. In the first, the liberties of the Commonwealth was destroyed and the Constitution overturned by an army led by Julius Caesar, who was appointed to the command by the constitutional authority of that Commonwealth. He changed it from a free republic whose fame has sounded and is still celebrated by all the world into that of the most absolute despotism. A standing army effected this change, and a standing army supported it through a succession of ages, which are marked by the annals of history, with the most horrid cruelties, bloodshed, and carnage. The most devilish, beastly, and unnatural vices that ever punished or disgraced human nature. I need to join a book club then. Then that would keep me on top of this. I'm always so and this is in the new information age, I'm always so interested in keeping up with what's, going on online and so I don't read books too often, but I do love reading books. Okay, I'm going to get back to this. The same army that in Britain vindicated the liberties of that people from the encroachments and despotisms of a tyrant king, assisting Cromwell, the general, in wresting from the people that liberty that they so dearly earned. You may be told these instances will not apply to our case, but those who would persuade you to believe this either mean to deceive you, or have not themselves considered the subject. I firmly believe no country in the world had ever a more patriotic army than the one which so ably served this country in the late war. Did I enjoy Tea Girl? I did, very much. Yeah, I just read it in one sitting. I've been recommending it. It was really good. And I like that kind of writing, like James Michener, the guy that writes all those historical fiction novels about different states, like Hawaii and Alaska. I think he's in Texas. He's like written some, they're like such epic stories that are all based, off of the real stories, but then having fictional characters just like Tea Girl. Yeah, I love reading like that. I love learning, while reading. And I actually so the retail page that I have, teaanditspeople.com, I bought that URL over a year ago with the intention of building a community around writing a book together about tea and telling the history of tea. And this would be a huge series because there's so many different communities and people that have fallen into the life of tea, and so many interesting stories that could be told. And I don't even want to focus on the stories that have already been told, right? The low-hanging fruit would be, to tell the stories of Robert Fortune and, all the other famous legends of tea. I really want to dig deep and talk about the story of the origin of the seeds. Those indigenous stories that are forgotten, just like that panel, I was part of yesterday. And the way that Lisa C. wrote that book really was this is exactly, the kind of storytelling that I think tea needs more of, And so, the fact that she doesn't want to write a sequel, I think is fine. Actually, she finished that book very good. And I found the ending to be, quite rushed, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm going to read, you told me about this, My Dear Hamilton. I'm definitely going to read that. I like historical fiction. Yeah, but I don't think, there's definitely a lot more stories that could be told around tea that I think she would do an incredible job doing. And maybe she'll find that, if we keep inspiring her, keep writing about tea, teach us more about tea. Because, yeah, there was a lot to learn in that book. There was a lot to learn. Okay, where was I? I don't know if I'm going to finish this. I mean, this article is much more about military itself. I'm not trying to talk about military. I'm trying to decipher what was the militia and what was the context that instigated a whole right to bear arms for the case of militia. Let me see if it's in here. If I just use a tool find it, where he addresses if there should be a separation. I mean, he's obviously yeah, he doesn't talk about militia. He's obviously talking about decentralizing the power of the military. While our buddy Hamilton was talking more about centralizing that power and the need to separate the militia from the military and to formalize the roles of the militia and what they would do or not do. So I mean, in reading this, I have cleared out a couple of questions that I had in my own mind about what a militia is. So yeah, it is, at least when how Hamilton, has written in this paper, and it's not really written into the Constitution. So I guess we kind of have to base off of this paper of like what was intended in the meeting in the Second Amendment. But I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll have to that's the National Guard, I think, right? So organized militia, it's state militia forces, the National Guard, and the naval militia. A naval militia in the United States is a reserve military organization administered under the authority of a state government. It is also often composed of Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard reservists, retirees, and volunteers. Yeah, so it's like a Coast Guard? No. We got National Guard. It's a part of the reserve components of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. It is a military reserve force composed of National Guard military members, or units of each state and the territories of Guam, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, District of Columbia. So here's just like the Wikipedia. The militia of the United States is defined by the U.S. Congress has changed over time. During colonial America, all able-bodied men of all ages were members of the militia. And that's what Hamilton had said in his paper. Depending on the respective states' rule, individual towns formed local independent militias for their own defense. The year before the Constitution was ratified, the new Constitution empowered Congress to organize, arm, and discipline this national military force, leaving significant control in the hands of each state government. Today, as defined by the Militia Act of 1903, the term militia is used to describe two classes within the U.S. So there's the organized militia, which is the National Guard, and the naval militia, and the unorganized militia, composed of reserve militia, every able body of at least 17 and under 45 years of age, not a member of the National Guard or naval militia. So that's me. That's cool. I'm part of the unorganized militia. That's cool. A third militia is a state defense force that is authorized by the state and federal governments, and that is a state military forces, state guards, state militias, state military reserves. Congress has organized the National Guard under its power to raise and support armies and not its power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. This Congress chose to do in the interest of organizing reserve military units, which were not limited in deployment by the structures of its power over the constitutional militia, which can be called forth only to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. The modern National Guard was specifically intended to avoid status as the constitutional militia, a distinction recognized by Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Sorry, my phone ringing. We'll talk to him later. So this is cool. Wikipedia has a pretty good article on militia and talking about the evolution of what a militia was from the colonial era to Revolutionary War, Confederate period, to now. So I'll have to get more into this. This is very cool. I'm learning so much today. But what is this unorganized militia? I'm not seeing, maybe if I find another article on it. I guess I should just look at U.S. Code 10. Time, we're at 4 o'clock already. I don't know if I'm going to have time to go to this Federalist paper number 10. It's a long one. Titled, "The Union as a Safeguard Against Domestic Faction and Insurrection," from the New York Packet. Yeah, I'll go over this. This will be next week, I guess. Yeah, this has been cool, though. There's still not a whole lot about this unorganized militia and what kind of powers they have. Someone told me to research, and as far as self-organized militia, local community organized militia, how legal is that? How constitutional is that? My friend says it's not, and that a good story to research would be the Black Panthers, because they were like a community organized militia, and the government did not take care of them. Definitely did not see them as being. This is an article. What's this called? Constitutional Militia. That's what the website is called. Oh, that's an interesting website. I'll have to look at more. But it has an article here. Oxymoronic, unorganized militia. Notwithstanding that the clauses in the original Constitution pertaining to the militia of the several states and the Second and Fifth Amendments all speak in one clear and consistent voice, and notwithstanding that they are all parts of the self-same supreme law of the land, which the senators and representatives in Congress, as well as the members of several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and several states, shall be bound by the oath and affirmation to support, the constitutional commands remain unfulfilled. Worse yet, notwithstanding that the militia of the several states are the constitutional institutions which properly organized would secure we the people's right to keep and bear arms and maximize its political significance and practical efficacy. Yet next to the Americans know anything about them today. The reason for this Justice Story pinpointed long ago. Story wrote in the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, his insight into growing indifference among Americans have proven all too prophetic. For what he recorded only in its beginnings have come to pass in full in modern times, both with respect to the Second Amendment as evidenced by the plethora of plainly unconstitutional gun control statutes on the books at the national, state, and local levels, and also to the even greater degree with respect to the militia causes of the Constitution, as evidenced by the way the general government and states have cordoned off as impotent and useless in the so-called unorganized militia a huge portion of the population, with next to no complaints from anyone. For the prime example, the foundational contemporary congressional statute that purports to deal with the militia is fundamentally flawed. The militia of the United States consists of all able bodies, males of at least 17 years of age, under 45 years of age, who have made a declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. Oh, so it doesn't count me. I have to join the National Guard to join the militia. All right. But I can be part of the unorganized militia. Okay, that's cool. Actually, no. That's what this says. Female citizens only through the organized militia. The classes of the militia are the organized militia, which consist of the National Guard and the Naval Militia, and the unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or Naval Militia. The problems are is that the Constitution allows no militia in the United States at all. Second, and evidenced by some 150 years of pre-constitutional American history, the militia of the several states should be composed of at least all males from 16 to 60 years old. Third, the Constitution allows for no dichotomy between organized militia and unorganized militia. Fourth, the National Guard and the Naval Militia cannot be constitutionally any parts of the militia of the several states. Congress has left what it calls the unorganized militia entirely unorganized, unarmed, undisciplined, and ungoverned by any statute of the general government. By consigning a huge number of Americans to the unorganized militia, Congress prevents itself and the president from performing their constitutional duties and leaving tens of millions of people wholly unprepared. Okay, so yeah, I'm not alone in feeling lost in this. That there is confusion and contradiction going on. The primary purpose of the militia is not simply military, but ultimately political in nature. After all, it is a political power that grows out of the barrel of the gun. The militia are necessary to the security of a free state, and therefore without the militia, either a free state will lack security, or the security that does arise from some source will support a state that is other than free. Indeed, precisely because the militia are not only necessary to the security of every free state, but also integral parts of the Constitution's federal system. The likelihood is that without the militia, the entire Constitution will fail, and America's present form of government will become destructive of the ends from which it was instituted. Yeah, so this is all just an organization. Here, let me see what this is. I'm like reading this thing, I don't even know. It's an interesting website. Now the website doesn't give a whole lot of information about who the people behind this, but this is basically a campaign talking about the constitutionality of the militia. Obviously, they want it. I mean, I feel like if we're going to still have a conversation and hold space for the Second Amendment and gun rights and allow people to interpret the Second Amendment as their right to bear arms and own guns and use guns, then we got to talk about what is militia, and what is this unorganized militia, especially, because that, the people that are demanding their rights to bear arms are people that aren't a part of the organized militia. But there's not a whole lot of insight about what the unorganized militia is, and yeah. Anyway, this is interesting learning today. All right. I think this is it for me today. I'm pretty tired. That was a lot of reading. These Federalist Papers are going to be pretty killer to get through. So I think I'll only be able to do like one every time. There's 85, so... but, I'll also, every time I read one of the Federalist Papers, I think it's going to be really important to read that counter-argument from the Anti-Federalist paper. And understand, like, the whole perspective of what was going on. Because this is so relevant to right now. Especially, in the business that we do and the efforts that we have here at TLED are about the power of decentralized power and distributed power among everybody to create a more mindful system, a true capitalistic system. We're a business, so we are, playing in capitalism. And so, we advocate for decentralization, and this is exactly it. I mean, this is America's history of this argument between the centralized and the decentralized. Yeah, reading it aloud helps. Yeah, you're right. I probably would get lost if I was just like reading this as a book and just but like having this interaction and having the questions back and forth definitely helps. So Terry, thank you so much. This was fun. I'm about to cut off on Instagram, so I'll see you tomorrow. Tea Talks. I'll see you then. Bye. All right, guys. It's been an hour of reading very dry stuff. I appreciate all of you. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be a very special Tea Talks. Actually, if you guys are interested in being a part of it, I'm going to put a link in the comments, and you can go there to sign up. It's going to be at 2 p.m., our usual live time. And we're going to have Ray from Grass Tree People come on to talk about, or at least to continue the conversation we were having from yesterday's panel. So if you watched yesterday's panel and you have more questions and you want to talk more about it, please join us for Tea Talks tomorrow. And you can go to that link, teatalks.com, to sign up so that you can get access to the Zoom room where we will gather tomorrow. So until then, I'll see you next time.